All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about is protein turnover or the metabolism of amino acids. We talked in depth about carbohydrate metabolism. We talked in depth about fatty acid metabolism. We're really going to talk very generally about protein metabolism because it's actually very specific to each amino acid, and we're not going to learn 20 different metabolic pathways. Okay, so we're just kind of broadly going to speak about what happens with protein turnover. The thing about protein turnover, like really the thing to know about protein turnover is that the body does not have any way of storing amino acids. So it builds uses amino acids to build proteins, but if there's no need to build new proteins, it doesn't have a way to store those amino acids. So it converts them into energy, or it processes them further. It can either go into converting them into things like neurotransmitters or the bases for nucleotides or something like that, right? It as other important components of the cell. So for example, like our nucleotide bases, our adenine and our uracil, etc. If we got too much amino acid floating around, we can convert it into one of those components, right? Because we get amino acids from our diet. We eat proteins, our body breaks those down into amino acids. If it can't use those to build other proteins, then it's going to first convert them into the other stuff it needs, as well as to use them for energy. Okay, so amino acids can be further broken down into small components that can sometimes enter into the citric acid cycle through acetyl-CoA and then be further used to generate ATP. So your body can metabolize these amino acids and convert them into energy. That's one way to do it. Again, there's no common way for each amino acid. It's unique to each amino acid, which is why we're not going to learn the details of it. But just knowing that some amino acids get converted into energy, that's really what I want. Okay. The other thing, though, is that amino acids have a lot of nitrogen. Okay. And so in order to put it into the citric acid cycle, you need to get rid of that nitrogen. And that nitrogen comes off in the form of an ammonium ion. The ammonium is toxic to the cell. Okay, so when your body's eating a lot of protein, it wants to convert that amino acid into energy. Unfortunate byproduct of that is always going to be ammonium. And so what your body does is package that in urea, which will then get flushed out of your system in your urine. Okay, so protein metabolism, you can turn it into energy, but you have to deal with this toxic waste product, the ammonium ion, and your body does that by converting it to urea. Okay. Amino acids can be used for energy. These typically happens in periods of fasting or starvation. Your body doesn't love to use proteins as a source of energy because it inevitably will lead to the breakdown of your body proteins as well. If you have these metabolic proteins activated for amino acids, it'll turn on some of the amino acids that are there doing their function in proteins that your enzymes that your body wants, right? So not really great. That's why if you have extended periods of fasting or something like anorexia, a condition where you're just not eating the correct number of any calorie really, your body will start to attack its own proteins, including those in your heart muscles and other sort of things where they're really, really important, right? So that's anorexia will lead to a decrease, not only in like your muscle mass that you think of in your biceps, but also all the other muscles like in your heart and in your lungs and stuff like that. Your body kind of just randomly starts pulling amino acids from anywhere it can. Okay, so this is just sort of an example of the type of step that we would get metabolizing a amino acid for energy. We can see that we can convert a glutamate into energy in the form of NADH, right? So this is going to be a process in which glutamate is catabolized, and one of the products is NADH, which can go on to the electron transport chain and generate its 2.5 ATP. But again, the trouble here is you also get this byproduct of ammonium. And again, that ammonium has to be dealt with because it's toxic to the cell. This is where the urea cycle comes in. The urea cycle is about cleaning up those byproducts of amino acid metabolism. And what it does is it combines CO2 with that ammonium into urea, this molecule here, which can be safely passed out of the body through urine. Okay, so that inevitable byproduct of amino acid metabolism is ammonium. Ammonium is toxic to the cells. Your cells deal with this by packaging that ammonium into urea and flushing it out of the body. Okay, this is what's known as the urea cycle, not allowing ammonium to accumulate. Okay, and again, I just briefly wanted to show this. This isn't really the details. Again, there's really not much about protein turnover that I expect you to know other than what I've been emphasizing up until this point. We don't have the same sort of level of detail that we do with our beta oxidation and all of that carbohydrate metabolism. And that's because each amino acid is actually very different in how it would be metabolized. Okay, so for example, leucine, lysine, and phenylalanine can be converted into acetoacetyl-CoA. Isoleucine, leucine, and tryptophan can be converted to acetyl-CoA, which can make its way into the citric acid cycle. Alanine, cysteine, glycine, serine, and threonine, they can be converted to pyruvate, which can be converted to acetyl-CoA and enter the citric acid cycle. Arginine, glutamate, glutamine, and histidine can actually enter the citric acid cycle at like the midway point. So they wouldn't create right? So this first step, which created NADH, this step here creates NADH. Well, they're entering the pathway after that. So they wouldn't make as much NADH as if we started out with isoleucine, for example. So these are just these level of complications that I'm talking about when I say amino acid metabolism. Each amino acid is kind of unique. And again, we're not going to memorize 20 different metabolic pathways. Just important to note, each one of these amino acids, or you can kind of group them together, would enter the citric acid cycle at a different component. And thus, for example, arginine, you wouldn't be able to get quite as much energy from as you would isoleucine.